I sat on the edge of the guest bed, my leg throbbing beneath its bandage, as their laughter floated down the hall like I was already gone. The smell of lemon polish and dinner wine hung in the air, her voice cutting through both. "She's just an old woman we're keeping out of pity." My son didn't argue. He laughed, softly, agreeing. I didn't cry, I didn't speak. I just listened and waited. Because the house they mocked me from wasn't theirs to keep. It was the one I co-signed, owned, and would soon take back. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The TV murmured in the corner of the guest bedroom, but Lois wasn't really watching it. Her leg throbbed beneath the thick white bandages, and every time she shifted, pain pulled a tight line down her shin. The house smelled like lemon wood polish and something slightly sterile, like the plastic of two new furniture. Dana had always kept things cold, visually and emotionally. She tried to keep her eyes closed, to rest, but something tugged her back awake. The sound of voices, just beyond the cracked door, kitchen, 2 rooms over. Dana's voice carried in that sharp, precise way hers always did, even when she thought she was whispering. "She's just an old woman we're stuck supporting," Dana snapped. "She should be grateful." There was a pause. Then, Mark laughed. Not loud, not cruel, but it was a chuckle, an agreement. Lois blinked. The air in the guest room seemed to still completely. Her hands gripped the thin, pilled blanket. Her ears rang slightly, not with age, but with the blood pressure spike she recognized from years of nursing work. She's just an old woman. She couldn't move for a moment. Not from the pain, though that was there, but from something sharper. Disbelief, maybe. Or the sour taste of being tolerated in a house she had once helped pay the down payment for, back when Mark still called her every week and asked her how to refinance loans. She listened harder. "Honestly, we should have just sprung for a nurse," Dana muttered. "She can barely do anything without someone helping her to the damn bathroom." "I know," Mark said. Another chuckle. "But she's stubborn. You know my mom." That last line broke something. Stubborn. It wasn't the words. It was how casual it all sounded. How normal. As if her being there, inconvenient and embarrassing, was just another burden to be discussed after dinner, like laundry or the gutters needing cleaning. Lois blinked again. This time, her eyes stung. She stared up at the ceiling where a recessed light buzzed faintly. The kind of ceiling light that made everything look like a showroom. This wasn't a home. It never had been. That night, silence cloaked the house, except for the sound of the refrigerator hum and the occasional whisper of cars passing on the suburban cul-de-sac. Lois sat upright in the guest bed, a pillow clutched to her chest. She looked down at her knee, still swaddled in a post-op bandage. Her leg ached. Her pride ached worse. She moved slowly, hands trembling only slightly as she peeled back the tape. The bandage clung to the healing incision beneath, raw, angry, but clean. The skin was bruised and fragile, but Lois didn't flinch. She cleaned it herself, redressed it, reclaimed it. Her fingers moved with the precision of someone who'd done this 100 times before. Because she had, on strangers, on patients, on her late husband, now on herself. She didn't need help, she needed space, she needed truth. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, she needed a plan. There was a soft tap at the door, not a knock, just a presence, a rustle. Still awake, came Patricia's voice. Lois looked up. Patricia was her sister, older by 2 years, sharper in the mouth, stronger in spirit. She'd been the one who told Lois, long ago, not to get sucked into raising men who didn't stay raised. But Lois had married Tom, had Mark, and believed in softness. Until now. "Come in," Lois said. Her voice was calm, clear. Patricia stepped in with her shoes off and a bottle of water in hand. Her eyes flicked to the bandage. "You took it off yourself." "They want me to be grateful," Lois said quietly, "for being a burden." Patricia exhaled. She sat down on the edge of the bed, eyes sharp with that steel Lois remembered from their teenage years, when Patricia decked a boy for grabbing Lois's arm at the skating rink. "Well," Patricia said, if they want gratitude so bad. She leaned in, voice low, smile tight. Let's show them a receipt instead. Lois didn't smile, but something in her eyes flared back to life. She reached for her phone. The next morning, Patricia drove Lois to the bank. They didn't speak much on the way. The radio played a low buzz of country ballads, the kind that sounded like cracked dirt roads and summer divorces. Lois sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her knee braced with a wrap, her jaw clenched tighter than the seatbelt across her chest. She watched the suburban homes scroll past, rows of manicured lawns, trimmed hedges, American flags drooping in the windless October heat. It had been 17 years since Mark stood in her living room, holding the mortgage paperwork and shaking hands. 27 years old, shirt wrinkled, eyes wide with the kind of desperation that made Lois forgive too easily. "We can't get approved without a co-signer," he'd said. "Dana's credit's shot. Just for the loan, Mom, please, it's the dream house." Lois had asked for one promise. "You miss a payment, I'm out," she'd said. "You stay current. You respect that I'm legally tied to this." "Of course," Mark had said. "You think I'd let you down?" Now, in the present, Lois stared through the tinted glass of the First Financial Community Bank. The logo was the same, the branches curved like they were meant to look soft and trustworthy. Patricia pulled into a handicap spot and cut the engine. "You sure you don't want me to go in with you?" Lois shook her head. "No, this part's mine." Inside, the air smelled like artificial lavender and toner ink. Everything looked too clean, too bright, as if being broke wasn't supposed to feel this fluorescent. She asked for Elena, an old contact from when she'd worked payroll accounts for the school district. Elena still remembered her, greeted her with a tight hug and a sharper look. "Lois, you look good, girl. Just tired." Lois nodded, her voice calm. "I need a copy of the mortgage file. My name's on the deed. I need everything. The loan status, payments, escrow, taxes. All of it." Elena didn't blink, just motioned for her to follow into a private office. 15 minutes later, Lois sat at a fake wood desk staring at numbers that made her stomach crawl. The printouts fanned across her lap like a deck of loaded cards. Each page told the same story: missed payments, late fees, delinquent tax balances, and a warning in bold red text. "Property at risk of foreclosure. Final notice pending." Lois stared at the balance due, almost $18,000 in arrears. Elena cleared her throat. "Lois, I shouldn't be showing you this, but since you're on the loan, you're liable. You have a right to see where things stand, and it's not good." Lois didn't reply right away. Her fingers tapped once against the edge of the desk, then again, then still. "I co-signed for them," she said quietly. "That's my name on this, my credit, my guarantee." Elena hesitated. "Legally, if the loan defaults, the responsibility lands on you too. Foreclosure proceedings impact both borrowers." Outside the window, a man walked by with a Starbucks and a toddler on his shoulders. The world moved like nothing was collapsing, like her son hadn't been chuckling about her the night before while his financial world silently disintegrated around him. "Can I get copies of all of this?" Lois asked. Elena nodded and began printing. Patricia was waiting in the parking lot, arms crossed over the steering wheel. "Well?" she asked as Lois climbed back in. Lois didn't speak. She placed the stack of papers on her lap, watching Patricia's eyes flicker down and widen. "You gotta be kidding me," Patricia muttered. She flipped through page after page, her voice rising with each one. "Late since July? They're 3 steps from losing everything." Lois looked out the window. "He never told me, not once." "Because he's counting on you not to look. That's the kind of boy you raised." Lois winced at that, but she didn't argue. She took the pages back, set them carefully in her tote bag like evidence. "They needed me to co-sign," she said, voice low. "They couldn't have gotten the house without me. That was the deal." Patricia's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "And what's the deal now?" Lois looked over at her, eyes darker than they had been the night before. "Now, they've given me a gift." "A gift?" Lois smiled, bitter and cold. "Leverage." The sun hadn't yet burned off the morning fog when Lois stepped out of the car and onto the cracked walkway of her own front yard. The dew clung to her sneakers, and the air held that sweet October chill that made everything feel honest again. She exhaled slowly, deeply. Like someone who hadn't truly breathed in weeks, Patricia killed the engine behind her. "You sure you don't want me to stay a bit?" Lois shook her head. "I'm home." It wasn't grand. A modest two-bedroom craftsman tucked beneath a leaning sycamore. The paint on the porch railings flaked where last winter's storms had chewed through, and the screen door creaked like a ghost still lived there, but it was hers. No loans, no strings. Just a clean deed, fully paid off since 2003, locked in her filing cabinet behind a key no one else had touched. She made her way inside without a word. The air smelled like cinnamon and old wood and the faint trace of gardenia from the plug-in in the hallway. The kind of smell no one notices unless they've been gone long enough to forget it. She stood in the front room for a full minute, taking it in. The wall clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. No voices, no Dana. No footsteps pacing just out of earshot like judgment with heels on. Here, she didn't feel like a patient. She felt like a person. Lois settled onto the arm of the couch and unzipped her tote. The mortgage statements sat untouched, still paper-clipped in neat rows, but she didn't reach for them. Not yet. She set the packet on the coffee table and stared at it. You always think betrayal is loud, she thought, but sometimes it sounds like a laugh behind your back in your son's kitchen. A knock startled her. She turned, knee-twinging, and peered through the side window. For a moment she hesitated, but then she opened the door. Ivy stood there, 27, nervous, wrapped in a knit cardigan and holding a thermos in both hands like it might steady her. Her eyes were rimmed in the kind of regret that takes its time to show up. She didn't try to fake a smile. I heard you left," Ivy said. "This morning. I thought you might," she faltered. Lois held the door open just enough for Ivy to step through. "I made coffee," Ivy said, gently lifting the thermos. "Cinnamon and chicory. I know it's your favorite." Lois took it in both hands, warm, real. The scent hit her harder than expected. "I should have said something to them," Ivy said. "Last night, when they were talking like that. I heard it too." Lois nodded slowly. "But you didn't." "No, I didn't." The silence stretched between them, but Lois didn't fill it. Instead, she stepped back and gestured toward the table. "You want a muffin?" she asked, her voice calm, almost light. "They're from the freezer, but they still taste decent." Ivy blinked at her, not sure if the forgiveness was real or just a mask. But she stepped inside. She sat. She drank the coffee with quiet reverence. Lois didn't mention the mortgage, didn't say a word about the bank, or the unpaid taxes, or the foreclosure clock ticking in Mark's backyard like a bomb no one bothered to disarm. She just smiled faintly, pulled out a second cup, and let Ivy stay. That afternoon, Patricia returned with 2 manila folders and a half-eaten egg salad sandwich. They sat at the dining table, papers fanned between them, sunlight casting long slashes across the hardwood. "This one's your tax record. Goes back 10 years, clean as a hospital sheet," Patricia said, tapping the file. "And this, utilities, auto titles, insurance. Everything paid, everything current." Lois nodded. "I want it all documented. Every dollar, every signature." "For what?" Lois didn't answer directly. She slid the folders into a fireproof safe beneath the sideboard. Then, without fanfare, she opened her laptop and pulled up a tab she hadn't touched in 2 years. Her living trust. It took 20 minutes, 2 logins, 1 e-signature. Beneficiary name: Ivy LeClaire. Relation: granddaughter. Status: sole heir. She sat back and looked at the screen. The cursor blinking beside Ivy's name. Not Mark, not Dana. Not the people who'd whispered about her when they thought she was sedated and too slow to care. Patricia leaned against the doorway, watching. "You sure about that?" Lois didn't even blink. "They wanted me out of the way," she said. "I'm making it easier for them." The envelope arrived 2 days later, delivered to Mark and Dana's mailbox, but addressed to Lois Martin. Heavy stock, government grade, printed in thick black letters. Urgent delinquency status. Final warning. Dana slid it open with a nail file, standing barefoot in the kitchen. Her robe hung loose, and her face was creased with the exhaustion of someone who knew more than she'd ever admit. "Did you change the bank password?" she called out, holding up the letter. Mark, groggy and shirtless, shuffled in with a half-eaten granola bar in hand. "No. Why?" She didn't answer. just handed him the letter and stared. As his eyes scanned the page, color drained from his face. "Shit," he muttered. "They're escalating to foreclosure proceedings." Dana crossed her arms. "They sent it to her, not us. That means she's still the listed contact on the loan." Mark looked up. "Maybe it's just a formality. She co-signed. She probably still gets alerts." "Or," Dana said sharply, "she's finally figured it out." That evening, Mark called. Lois let the phone ring twice before answering. She sat on her front porch, a throw blanket around her shoulders, and Ivy inside reading an old cookbook like it was scripture. The air smelled like pine mulch and honeysuckle. Her voice was calm when she picked up. "Hi, Mark." He didn't ease into it. "Did you get a letter from the bank?" "I did." "You didn't think to tell me." Lois leaned back in the chair, watching the street lamps buzz to life. "You didn't think to tell me you were 3 months behind." A long pause. "I thought you were still the backup," he said slowly, as if the words themselves made it sound better. "I was," Lois replied. "Until 18 months ago." Mark sat up straighter on his end of the line. "What do you mean, you, what?" "I removed myself during the refinance window," Lois said. "I spoke to Elena. You remember Elena. You signed the e-authorization. Digital doc, time-stamped. You probably thought it was another bank consent form." Mark's voice caught. "No, that's not. Are you serious?" "I've made no recent transactions on your behalf," Lois said evenly. "Nor have I guaranteed any future ones. You can't just—" "I did, Mark. I already did." Patricia walked into the room, holding a glass of iced tea and one raised brow. She mouthed silently. "How's it going?" Lois covered the phone and whispered. "He just realized I pulled the plug last year." Patricia grinned and pointed toward the hallway where Stephen stood, back from his law office, briefcase still in hand. His jacket was draped over one arm, his expression already dark with resolve. Lois clicked on speaker. "Stephen's here. He can explain it better." Mark started to protest, but the speaker crackled to life. "Mark," Stephen said, his voice cool, professional. "You have a problem, but it's not Lois's. Hold on, she co-signed the original. She was released during the refinance window, with your consent. I reviewed the documents myself. You don't remember signing it because you didn't bother to read it, but it's legal, binding, filed." Mark's breath caught. "So she's not liable?" "No, not in any form, not even as a silent guarantor. The obligation is yours, solely." Silence. "You owe her," Stephen added, "not the other way around." Lois said nothing, just let the weight of it hang. Mark finally spoke. "We can fix this, if you just step in, temporarily, help us get current. It's your name on the deed?" "No, Mark," Lois said, and her voice had steel now. "That was never part of the deal. You broke it. You gambled I wouldn't notice. I just thought you thought I'd cover it. You thought my silence meant consent. It never did." When the call ended, Patricia didn't wait. "Pull the pin, Lois," she said, her voice low but urgent. "He's not going to stop unless you make him." Lois didn't respond right away. She stood, walked slowly over to the cabinet, and pulled out the folder with the foreclosure notice, property status, her release papers, and tax records. All in order, all crisp and ready. Ivy watched her from the kitchen with wide, uncertain eyes. Lois looked down at the documents. Then she picked up the phone. The call from the bank came just after noon. Dana was in the laundry room, folding a stack of towels, when her cell buzzed on the dryer. She answered without checking the number, irritation already coiled in her voice. "This is Dana." A pause, a voice, polite but clipped. "Mrs. Parker, this is Christina from First Financial Mortgage Services. We've attempted to contact you and Mr. Parker several times. Your mortgage is now officially 4 months delinquent. If full payment is not received by the 15th, foreclosure proceedings will be filed." Dana's mouth opened, but no sound came. The towel in her hand slipped to the floor. "We understand this is a difficult time," the voice continued, "but your account is no longer in forbearance. No arrangements have been made. We need to speak with the decision-maker today." Dana's voice cracked. Can you just give us until next month? Just a little more time." "I'm sorry, ma'am. That window has passed." By the time Mark got home, she was pacing the kitchen. "They're filing," Dana snapped before he could put down his keys. We're 4 months out and they're not budging. Mark tossed his bag onto the counter. Jesus, I thought we had until... You thought wrong, Dana said, cutting him off. They won't wait anymore. Mark ran a hand through his hair, already flushed with frustration. It's the bank's fault. They didn't send us the updated forbearance paperwork. They knew we were behind and they didn't call sooner. Dana stared at him. You're blaming the bank? Who else am I supposed to blame? Mark shouted. A quiet voice cut through the room. Yourselves. They turned. Ivy stood in the hallway, arms crossed. Her eyes harder than either of them had seen in years. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. But the yelling had pulled her from her room, and now the words hung heavy in the air. Mark blinked. Ivy, this is not... You said... Can't Grandma just float it? She said flatly. I heard you. Dana froze. Mark shifted uncomfortably. Ivy? She owes us, Dana started. After everything... No, Ivy said, her voice sharp. She owes you nothing, and I'm done pretending she does. Mark opened his mouth to protest, but Ivy raised her hand. You used her. You took her name, her credit, her help, and then laughed behind her back. You let her feel like a burden while this whole mess burned down around you. She turned, walked away without another word. The finality in her tone was the kind you don't argue with. Not without losing more. That night, Lois sat in her study, glasses perched low on her nose, a fountain pen steady in her hand. Her handwriting, always neat from years of form reports and nurses' logs, now moved with deliberate precision across a blank white page. To whom it may concern, all future inquiries regarding this matter should be directed to legal counsel. I will not be responding to calls, texts, or correspondence outside formal representation. Respectfully, Lois Martin. She signed it, scanned it, attached it to an email, and forwarded it to Stephen with one line. Please handle all future communications. I'm done playing the quiet one. She leaned back in her chair and watched the screen go still, the message delivered. Outside, the wind picked up. The leaves along her street scraped the pavement like whispers turning into a warning. The next morning, a new envelope slid through Mark and Dana's mail slot. Inside, a formal letter from Stephen's office declaring Lois's legal boundary, a copy of the refinance release with Mark's digital signature, an invoice listing the original down payment Lois contributed, a summary of Lois's current holdings, not because she owed them, but because they needed to understand exactly who they underestimated. The letterhead gleamed in the morning light, heavy cream paper embossed with Stephen's firm name across the top. Lois signed her name at the bottom of the final document, her pen barely trembling. Revocation of power of attorney. Effective immediately, all previously granted financial or medical powers of attorney awarded to Mark Parker are hereby revoked. Her signature looked deliberate, definite. The ink darkened the line like a scar that had finally healed closed. Stephen looked up from the opposite side of the dining table. Once this is filed, he'll have zero access, no authorizations, no joint permissions. You'll stand alone on every account. That's the point, Lois said quietly. Patricia, perched on the arm of the couch behind her, crossed her arms. You're sure you want to do this before the weekend? He's going to find out fast. Lois glanced toward the window, where wind chimes swayed lazily in the autumn air. He already knows where the line is, she said. I'm just drawing it in ink. By afternoon, Elena from the bank called. Her voice carried that careful professional calm of someone walking across thin ice. Lois, she began, just to confirm. The secondary authorization on the Parker mortgage account has been revoked. Your name is fully detached. I also froze 2 linked emergency savings accounts where your information still appeared on the access log. Good, Lois said, leaning back in her chair. Elena hesitated. The bank's upper management wanted me to ask, off the record, if you'd consider assisting the Parkers in preventing default. A temporary bridge payment could... Lois cut her off softly but firmly. No, I'm assisting them in learning consequence. There was a silence on the other end. Then Elena exhaled, a small, rueful sound. I'll note your decision. When the call ended, Lois sat still for a long time, the hum of the refrigerator the only noise in the room. The weight in her chest wasn't guilt. It was gravity finally redistributed where it belonged. Patricia came in, carrying 2 mugs of tea, and slid one across the table. You're not being cold, she said, You're being cured. Lois didn't answer, but the corner of her mouth lifted slightly. Later that evening, Ivy's text came through. A photo first, angled slightly. The kitchen light glaring off the envelope laid on the table. Across it, in bold red block print, were the words, "Final notice." Then the message underneath. They finally opened it. Dana cried. Mark didn't say a word. Lois stared at the photo for a long time. The paper looked oddly small against the expanse of the marble countertop she'd helped them pick out years ago, the one Mark had insisted on, for resale value. Now it reflected nothing but warning. She typed a reply. "Don't get pulled into it, Ivy. Let them handle what they built." Ivy's response came back within seconds. "I won't. Grandma, they never thought you'd fight back." "Neither did I," Lois typed, and hit send. Outside, the porch light flickered once, then steadied. The night felt sharper, clearer. Somewhere in the distance, wind scraped through dry branches like a whisper turning into applause. Lois stood, turned off her laptop, and placed her documents back into the fireproof safe one final time. When she closed the lid, the latch clicked with the quiet finality of a door sealing shut on an old life. The phone rang at 10:42 p.m. Lois stared at it from across the room, the screen glowing in the dark like it was daring her to pick up. Dana Parker, mobile. She didn't move. The call kept going. 6 rings, then voicemail, a beat of silence, then Dana's voice, thin and cracking at the edges. "Lois, please. I know you probably hate us, but we're—" A sharp exhale, a pause, then quieter. "We didn't mean what we said. Not like that. It was just stress. We didn't think it would get this far. We're desperate." The voice cracked again. Another breath. "Please call me back." Lois sat perfectly still in her reading chair, arms folded over a worn flannel blanket, eyes fixed on the dark window. Her tea had gone cold on the side table. The voicemail alert dinged once, then went silent. She stood, walked across the room, and picked up the phone, not to reply. She opened the audio file, saved it, and renamed it manually. Too late. MP3. Then she dropped the phone gently on the table and returned to her chair like nothing had happened. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street, headlights casting brief streaks of light across the living room wall before vanishing into the night. Steven stopped by the next morning. He didn't come in a suit this time, just jeans and a long wool coat, a legal pad under one arm. Patricia opened the door before Lois could get up. "I thought you'd want to hear it from me," Steven said as he took a seat at the kitchen table. "You're under no obligation to respond. Not to the voicemail, not to their texts, not to anything they try to send through Ivy." Lois nodded. She already knew, but hearing it out loud settled something deeper. "I listened to the message," she said calmly. "They're not sorry, they're cornered." Patricia slid a mug toward Steven and sat beside Lois. "What's the next move?" Lois turned to the small cedar file box she kept by the window, the one with family photos, clipped newspaper obits, and original trust documents. She opened it, pulled out the top folder, and laid it flat on the table. The manila label read, "Will and Estate, 2021 Draft." "I want to update the language," she said. "Formally, irrevocably. Mark's out." Steven gave a slow nod. "We'll need to file a new version. Public record, notarized." "Good," Lois said. Her voice didn't shake. Patricia watched her carefully. "You sure this isn't reaction?" Lois met her eyes. "This isn't reaction. This is correction." There was no fury in her tone, no bitterness. Just clarity. Ivy arrived an hour later with a grocery bag and 2 warm scones from the corner bakery. She hadn't said much since the voicemail, hadn't pushed. But today she leaned against the doorway to the kitchen and finally spoke. "I heard the message," she said softly. She sounded not like herself. Lois didn't look up from her file sorting. Desperation scrambles the voice. "She's only sorry because the walls are falling," Ivy said, her voice sharpening. Lois gave the slightest nod. "And she wants someone to drag her out from under them, again." "She won't find that person here," Ivy said. "No," Lois replied. "She won't." The will revisions took an hour. Steven worked quickly, patiently. At the signature line, Lois paused only once, long enough to look over the clause. "All residual estate, property, and cash holdings are to be bequeathed to Ivy LeClaire. All prior named heirs are formally removed from designation. She signed it with the same pen she'd used to revoke Mark's power of attorney. The ink didn't blot, the line didn't waver. It was a name written without apology. The phone call came in just after 9:00 a.m. Stephen wasn't in yet. He was still in transit from a courthouse hearing, but Jill, his paralegal of nearly 11 years, picked up on the third ring. "This is Jill, legal office of Stephen W. Green." A pause. Then, "Yes, hi, this is Lois Martin. I need to make a financial request. Just something urgent for my grandson. It's medical. I can confirm my birth date if needed." Jill narrowed her eyes. The voice wasn't old, but it wasn't Lois. It was a man, trying too hard to sound composed, and failing. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Jill said, tone neutral. "We don't process financial actions over the phone, even for existing clients." No, I understand," the voice said quickly. "Just, I was hoping to expedite something. You know, for family." Jill reached for the call trace log, already typing. "We'll need a notarized form," she said crisply, "and all requests must be submitted in writing, by the client of record." The caller hesitated, then hung up. No name, no confirmation, no thanks, just dead air. Elena's call came a little over an hour later, her voice tight. "Lois, it's Elena from First Financial." Lois was sitting in her sunroom, a pot of chamomile tea steeping beside her when the voicemail came in. She listened once, then again. "I flagged a suspicious attempt on your file this morning. Someone called using a voice claiming to be you, trying to reset the authorization PIN and access your old mortgage accounts. The same number used before, Mark's line, ending in 44. Thought you should be aware." Lois didn't flinch. She simply picked up her notepad, jotted down the time and call reference, and reached for her landline. The precinct smelled like coffee that had burned down to bitterness and bleach. A detective named Morales took the report. Lois sat across from him in a small office where the blinds were half bent, and the air conditioner clicked every few minutes. She wore a wool sweater and brought her own pen. When she spoke, her voice didn't shake. "He used to sign my birthday on loan forms when he needed my help," she said quietly. "But this time, I wasn't offering it." Morales nodded and slid the fraud alert authorization across the desk. "Attempted impersonation, financial misrepresentation, unauthorized access. You're fully within rights to report this, especially given the pattern." He paused. "I've seen these cases turn ugly. You sure you want to file this?" Lois stared at the document, then signed her name in crisp, slanted cursive. "I want a record," he nodded. "It'll be linked across all applicable systems, local, state, and financial. If he tries it again, the system won't ask questions. It'll alert." Back at home, Ivy was unpacking her second suitcase in the guest room. She moved with that quiet rhythm of someone who'd grown used to minimizing her presence, closing drawers softly, folding clothes twice before placing them. Lois stepped in, holding 2 folded towels. "You don't need to tiptoe," Lois said. Ivy smiled, a little embarrassed. "Old habit." Lois handed her the towels, then leaned on the doorframe. "This house has only ever had one owner," she said, "and now only one welcome guest." Ivy blinked, caught off guard. "I mean that," Lois added. "You're not here temporarily. You're here because you've earned it. There's a difference." Outside, the wind ticked gently against the glass, a soft shuffle of leaves skating across the porch. Stephen arrived after dinner, still in work slacks and a windbreaker. He sat down at the dining room table where Lois had already laid out the printed voicemail transcript, the call attempt log, and Elena's flagged report. He looked them over, slow and methodical. "I added it all to the estate file," he said. "Fraud attempt, time-stamped, traceable. It's now part of the official archive." Lois nodded, sipping her herbal tea. "That should be enough." "He'll know we filed," Stephen said. "I'm counting on it." Stephen watched her. "You're calm." "I've been here before," Lois replied. "Only difference is, this time I'm not making excuses for him." Stephen smiled faintly, then rose. "Let the clock run then. They're already behind." That night, Lois curled into her chair near the window, the fireplace flickering behind her. Ivy brought her a small plate, ginger snaps, and a slice of pear. Comfort food, she said. You've earned it. Lois gave her a tired smile, then reached for her phone as it buzzed once. Email. Fraud notification. County Recorder's Office. Status. Report filed. Confirmed. She didn't open the message. She didn't need to. The confirmation was enough. The screenshot came in at 6:17 a.m. Patricia's text was short. You're gonna want to see this before it disappears. Lois opened the message while standing at the kitchen counter, her hands still damp from washing breakfast dishes. The image loaded slowly, pulling up a post from a local Facebook community group, the kind that passed around casserole sign-up sheets and HOA complaints. But this one hit different. Please keep our family in your prayers. We're facing the possible loss of our home after a series of financial hardships. Our elderly mother, who we've cared for over the past few months, chose to walk away instead of helping. We don't want to speak ill. We just want understanding. Sometimes family lets you down when you need them most. Mark and Donna Parker. Lois stood in the quiet morning light, phone still in hand, reading it 3 times. Each sentence dripped with weaponized half-truths, just enough to sway anyone unfamiliar with the real story. Just enough to make her the villain. She walked calmly into the study, pulled open her desk drawer, and opened a folder on her desktop labeled Public Lies. She dragged the screenshot into it, renamed the file Sympathy Theft Parker Post.jpg. Then, without flinching, she opened her photos folder and took a screenshot of the original post herself, complete with names, timestamps, reactions, and the 13 comments beneath it. Some offered prayers, some asked what happened. One woman, Jenna from church, had commented, "Lois? Oh no, that doesn't sound like her at all." That one, Lois saved separately. Ivy didn't speak when she walked into the room later that morning, but when Lois turned the laptop around to show her, her jaw clenched. She read it slowly, then stepped back. They lived off her, Ivy muttered, voice low, and called it charity. Lois closed the laptop, said nothing. By noon, the post was gone, deleted, but not fast enough. The damage was already documented. And as Stephen often reminded her, screenshots were permanent currency in legal disputes. When Stephen arrived that afternoon, he had a manila envelope under one arm and a quiet sort of resolve in his eyes. Ivy let him in while Lois trimmed basil in the kitchen windowsill. "I saw it," Stephen said, without preamble, setting the envelope down on the table. "And I've already drafted language to add to your estate plan, an anti-contest clause." Lois glanced over. "You think they'll try?" "They won't win," he replied. "But they'll try." He opened the folder and slid the first page toward her. Legalese, bolded. "Any party who attempts to dispute or interfere with the lawful execution of this estate shall be disqualified from receiving any portion of the trust or assets therein." Lois read it slowly. She thought of the call attempts, the voicemail, the fraud, and now this, an emotional con played out in public for strangers to applaud. She reached for the pen. Her signature came easy. Later, just before sunset, Lois stepped outside with her gardening gloves and secateurs in hand. Ivy was in the kitchen organizing spices, soft jazz playing through the old Bluetooth speaker. The air smelled like warmed soil and rosemary. Lois moved to the rose beds, the ones she had planted the summer after Tom died. Hybrid teas in muted pink, crimson climbers along the fence. A small white bloom named Honor that hadn't thrived in years. She didn't rush. She pruned quietly, the snip of the shears sharp against the breeze. One stem at a time, she worked her way through them, deadheading the old blooms that no longer gave anything back. No anger in her hands, no sadness, just rhythm. When Ivy came to the back door and called her in for tea, Lois didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands, dirt beneath her nails, petals scattered in the grass, and whispered to no one in particular, "Nothing good grows without cutting back the rot." The cafe on Maple and Fifth had always been a little too modern for Lois's taste. Industrial lighting, concrete floors, baristas with rings in their noses, and lattes served in mason jars. But that morning, it suited her just fine. She sat by the window, a soft beige sweater wrapped around her shoulders, her coffee cooling slowly in her hands. Patricia sat across from her, scanning the menu like she actually cared what kind of oat milk they used. "You good?" Patricia asked, stirring her drink. Lois nodded, eyes out the window. "I'm fine." She wasn't jittery. She wasn't angry, just quiet. Across from her, Patricia's phone vibrated on the table. Ivy. Lois didn't look up until she saw Patricia's eyebrows rise. She unlocked the screen, read the message, then turned the phone toward her. "It's done," buyer confirmed. "Final bid accepted." "Sold." Lois exhaled, not with relief, not with satisfaction, with finality. A breath that had waited 17 years to be released. The house went to a private buyer, young couple from Atlanta, full cash offer. They planned to renovate and flip it. No sentiment, no strings. The auction itself lasted less than 10 minutes. No news crews, no neighbors. Just 3 bids, 1 winner, and a digital gavel slammed through the county website. Mark and Donna didn't attend, but Ivy had. Quiet in the back row, hair pulled back, arms folded tightly as the screen refreshed. She didn't smile when it closed. She just stood, took a photo of the final sale banner, and walked out. That afternoon, a certified letter was delivered to the Parker house. 30 days, that's what they had to vacate. No extensions, no appeals, no miracles. Mark stared at the envelope, reading it aloud like it might say something different the second time through. Dana sank onto the stairs, still in her robe. "This was our house," she said, voice raw. "We built our life here." Mark didn't answer. He just pressed his thumbs into his temples and muttered the only word that still felt solid: Lois. Lois and Patricia finished their lattes and then took the long way home, down the road past the dog park, the library, the strip of new condos that had eaten the old pharmacy where Tom used to buy her flowers on Thursdays. They didn't talk much. "You ever think it'd actually happen?" Patricia asked finally, squinting at the road. "No," Lois said softly. "I thought I'd die before I let go of that burden." "Then what changed?" Lois looked out the window, her voice barely more than breath. "I realized the home was never mine," she said, "and the debt never should have been theirs." That evening, Elena called. Her voice was warm, unguarded. Less like a bank officer and more like the woman who used to sneak extra pie slices to Lois at PTA fundraisers. "It's done," Elena said. "Final payout processed. Title cleared. Escrow closed." Lois stood in her kitchen, one hand on the back of a dining chair, the smell of lemon oil and old wood grounding her. "No liens?" she asked. "None," Elena replied. "It's clean. You're free of it." Lois closed her eyes, not in relief, more like reverence, like someone had handed her the silence she'd been owed for years. Elena hesitated. "You okay?" Lois smiled faintly. "I'm something better." By the second week of December, Mark and Dana were living out of overnight bags. They floated between spare rooms and half-finished basements, couch hopping through the mercy of friends who weren't asking questions, but definitely weren't inviting them to stay. Their once polished life had cracked down the center. Dana's blowouts gave way to ponytails. Mark's khakis were wrinkled more often than not. Neither one said the word auction out loud anymore. They called it temporary displacement. They told people it was a timing issue with refinancing. But even in casual conversations, there was always a pause, one beat too long, when someone asked where they were living now. Meanwhile, Ivy stayed in the guest room at Lois's house. Her textbooks spread across the desk that once belonged to Tom. The room smelled like sandalwood and lemon balm. Quiet. Steady. Hers. She kept a disciplined schedule. Morning coffee with Lois, classes online, evenings filled with reading and soft music. There were no slam doors here, no undercurrents of guilt, just 2 women, different in generation, aligned in spirit, moving through each day like they had finally exhaled. Finals week came and went. She finished her last exam on a Thursday evening and submitted it with a single keystroke, then walked into the living room holding her laptop. "All done," she said. Lois looked up from her crossword puzzle. "How'd you do?" Ivy hesitated, then grinned. "I think I aced it." They didn't toast, they didn't dance, but Lois reached over and squeezed her hand gently. Ivy didn't pull away. The next morning, Lois logged into her banking portal and authorized a tuition payment from the trust account. It was already earmarked. Ivy didn't know that yet. Recipient, University Financial Services amount, paid in full, memo, spring semester, Ivy LeClaire. The cursor blinked once before confirming the transfer. Outside, a wind swept through the yard, knocking the last of the golden leaves from the dogwood tree. Lois watched them flutter, then fall. They didn't fight the change, they let go when it was time. Patricia stopped by that afternoon with a scarf wrapped around her neck, and 2 cinnamon rolls she insisted were still warm, swear to God. She didn't bring up the house, or the bank, or Mark. But after a few minutes, she said softly, "You lost a house." Lois looked up. Patricia shrugged. "But you gained yourself." Lois considered that, stirred her tea, then said, "They never built a home. They only decorated the illusion." She didn't say it bitterly. She said it like she'd finally put the last puzzle piece in place, and it revealed something that had been there all along. That evening, Ivy sat curled on the couch, laptop in her lap, fingers moving steadily across the keys. Lois glanced over once, curious. "Homework?" "Essay," Ivy said. "Final reflection for sociology. Open prompt." "What's it called?" Ivy paused, looked up. "Inheritance of Clarity." Lois didn't speak, but something in her eyes warmed, a pride not loud but whole. The courthouse smelled faintly of varnished wood and stale coffee. Winter light filtered through the tall windows in dull silver bars, glinting off the brass nameplates that lined the hallway. Stephen walked ahead, briefcase in hand, his expression unreadable. Lois followed at an even pace, the tap of her sensible heels echoing down the corridor. She wore a navy wool coat and her mother's brooch pinned to the lapel, a quiet kind of armor. Ivy and Patricia sat waiting outside the hearing room, both standing as she approached. 15 minutes, Stephen murmured, checking his watch. "They're trying to argue duress." Patricia snorted. The only pressure in that house was self-inflicted. Lois gave a faint smile. "Let them talk." Inside, the room was hushed. A handful of people, the shuffle of papers, a gavel poised on the judge's bench. Mark sat across the aisle beside a weary-looking attorney in a brown suit. His shoulders were tight, his jaw set, eyes darting toward Lois but never holding long enough to meet hers. Dana wasn't there. The clerk called the case number, and Stephen rose, buttoning his jacket. His voice carried a calm authority that came from decades of precision. "Your Honor, the defense moves to dismiss the petition in full. The trust documents were executed under standard legal procedure, witnessed, notarized, and logged with the county clerk prior to any alleged conflict." He placed a folder on the bench with a quiet thud. The embossed seal of the county shone faintly in the light. "Exhibits A through F," Stephen continued. "Original signatures, video confirmation of signing, and supporting affidavits. All time-stamped before the date in question." Mark's attorney began to speak, his tone measured but brittle. "Your Honor, my client believes he was manipulated." "By whom?" the judge interjected, raising an eyebrow. The man hesitated. "By his mother, Your Honor." The courtroom went still. Lois didn't look up. She kept her gaze on the folder before her, hands folded neatly in her lap. Stephen's voice was steady. "There is no standing for a contest when the claimant has no legal, financial, or equitable interest remaining in the estate. The trust was finalized 18 months ago, well before the alleged duress occurred." The judge leaned back, flipping through the documents. His tone, when he finally spoke, was clear and cool. "The record reflects due process. There is no standing, no proof of coercion, no evidence of fraud or undue influence. Petition dismissed." The gavel dropped once, a sound like closure. Mark's attorney gathered his files without speaking. Mark remained seated, staring at the polished tabletop, knuckles pale where his hands gripped the edge. When he finally stood, he didn't look back. Outside, the air bit at Lois's cheeks. The sky hung low and gray, heavy with the promise of snow. Stephen walked beside her, his briefcase lighter now. "I'll have certified copies delivered by Friday," he said. "The ruling stands, irrevocable." Lois nodded. "Thank you, Stephen." He gave her a small smile. "It wasn't just a case, Lois. It was a statement." She didn't answer, only exhaled, her breath visible in the cold, drifting upward like a prayer released. Back home that evening, Ivy printed the court confirmation email and set it on the dining table beside Lois's cup of tea. "It's official," she said softly. "They can't contest anything." Lois looked down at the header, Estate of Lois Martin, petition dismissed. The font was small, the impact wasn't. "He tried to erase you," Ivy said. "The law wouldn't." Lois reached for her glasses and read it again, her voice low. "No one can erase what's properly written down." Ivy smiled faintly, then leaned in and hugged her. For the first time in months, Lois didn't stiffen. She let herself be held. Days later, the city library sent her a letter of thanks. The funds she'd quietly transferred from the trust, a modest donation for new reading alcoves and adult literacy programs, had been approved. They wanted to name the new corner after her. Lois declined the plaque. She asked for something simpler. "Just call it the quiet room," she wrote back. "Some people need silence to start over." By late January, Dana was gone. No dramatic exit, no flurry of texts, just a moving truck in the driveway of someone else's house, a small sedan trailing behind, and a relocation address forwarded to a P.O. box in Arizona. Mark didn't fight it, didn't chase her. When the papers came 2 weeks later, he signed them without contest. "They're calling it a mutual separation," Patricia said, reading the neighborhood group chat aloud from her phone. Translation: he couldn't keep her, and she didn't want to stay for the slow ruin. Lois said nothing. She kept stirring the soup, the ladle gliding in smooth, quiet circles. Mark tried to hold on to his job, remote contract work that had once given him flexibility, status, a sense of control. But when the foreclosure came up in his background check for a company reassignment, the offer evaporated. The HR email was short. "Due to discrepancies in residential history and instability in your financial profile, we regret to inform you." He didn't tell anyone directly. Ivy found out through a mutual friend from high school who messaged her with a simple, "Hey, is your uncle okay? He's not working anymore?" At Lois's house, the days passed without fanfare. Ivy's spring classes started up. Lois renewed her garden club membership and bought a new pair of pruning gloves with a thick wrist strap. Stephen stopped by once a week like clockwork, finalizing documents, digitizing files, archiving the last threads of a legal battle that now felt more like archaeology than conflict. "Your estate's bulletproof," he said one afternoon, slipping the final binder into her safe. "Irrevocable. Closed. Executed." Lois nodded. "Then we're done." Stephen looked at her for a long moment. "You sure?" She smiled faintly. "Closure doesn't need a ceremony, just a door that stays shut." One evening, as twilight turned the living room into soft shadow, Ivy sat cross-legged on the rug, organizing her class notes. A jazz record played quietly behind her, something smooth and slow with a saxophone that sounded like it had seen too much. "I used to feel guilty," she said, not looking up, "about not defending them sooner, about being quiet, letting them talk over you." Lois, seated on the couch with a throw over her lap, sipped her tea. "Now?" she asked gently. Ivy glanced up. "Now I feel honest." Lois nodded slowly. "Honesty is what saves us from bleeding out slowly." The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was mutual. Lois didn't send Mark anything, no letter, no call, not a box of old photos or a check tucked in a sympathy card. She simply stopped. And in that stopping, something shifted. The air around her got lighter, her hands stopped curling in sleep. Her breathing came easier. She didn't hate him, but she didn't carry him anymore. The email came from a freelance journalist based in Minnesota, someone Ivy followed in a financial advocacy forum. The subject line was plain: seeking sources, financial exploitation, within families. Lois read it twice before saying anything. She didn't answer right away. "I don't want to be in the spotlight," she finally said, sliding her reading glasses up to her hairline. "Not even for a minute." "I know," Ivy replied, sitting across the table, "but they're asking for anonymous stories. Documents, patterns, not names, just truth." Lois was quiet. She sipped her tea, then stood and walked to the fireproof safe in the corner cabinet. She pulled out a folder, not the full archive, not the court records or trust paperwork, but a curated collection of printed screenshots, bank statements, and time-stamped voicemails. She tapped it once on the table. If they want to learn, they can start here. The article ran 3 weeks later. When they live off you and call it charity, a deep dive into elder financial abuse within families, and the rising trend of legal emancipation among older women reclaiming control of their estates. Lois's name was nowhere in it. But her story lived between the lines. A mother pressured to co-sign, a house lost in silence, a legal reversal, a clean signature line declaring freedom. It was shared in every financial protection forum Ivy belonged to. It spread across elder rights groups. Even a subreddit dedicated to quiet estrangement picked it up, with users tagging it required reading for anyone who's ever felt trapped by blood. Ivy sat with Lois on the porch that night. The glow of her phone screen reflected in her glasses. "It's going to help people," she said softly. "It already is." Lois didn't reply, but her hand rested gently on Ivy's, still, present, grounded. The city library reached out again, this time with a proposal. Not for a plaque, not for a quiet thank you, but for something that could last. They wanted to start a seasonal speaker series. Public education on financial literacy, intergenerational wealth transfer, and legal safeguards for seniors. And they wanted to name it after her. Lois stared at the email for a long time. "I said no to the last plaque," she told Ivy. "But this is instruction, not recognition," she agreed, on one condition. "Make the first one student-led." April arrived with wind in the trees and tulips pushing through the garden bed. On a bright Saturday morning, folding chairs were set up in the library auditorium. A simple banner read, "The Loie Martin Lecture Series, Protecting What We Build, Real Talks About Money, Boundaries, and Legacy." Lois didn't sit in the front row. She chose a seat near the middle, half shadow, half light, right beside Patricia, who'd worn her good earrings and brought tissues just in case. Ivy stood at the podium, note cards in hand, her voice calm and clear. "When we talk about inheritance, we usually mean money," she began. "But that's not what I inherited first. What my grandmother gave me was something much harder to quantify: clarity, a boundary, a foundation." She paused. "She gave me proof that survival doesn't have to mean silence." Lois looked down at her hands folded in her lap. They didn't tremble. Patricia wiped at her eyes. "Oh, hell," she whispered, half laughing, half choking up. "You'd think I was at a wedding." Ivy smiled gently, then continued. "This series isn't about trauma. It's about structure, what we protect, what we pass on, and what we finally stop letting others take. A beat. She didn't leave me money. She placed it, intentionally. Like someone rebuilding a house on cleared land." The porch gleamed under the morning sun. 2 fresh coats of lavender across the railings, and a pale yellow trim along the eaves. The colors weren't loud. They were gentle, soft as breath, hues that had no interest in explaining themselves. Lois stood back with a hand on her hip, paint flecks across her forearm and the back of one wrist. Ivy crouched near the flower boxes, planting fresh marigolds with soil under her nails and dirt smudged across her cheekbone. They didn't speak much anymore about the past. There was no need to. It wasn't avoidance. It was recovery. Some stories, once fully told, don't need to be reread, just respected. The framed deed hung just inside the front door. Simple black frame, matte finish, no spotlight. Lois passed it dozens of times a day. She never stopped to admire it, never gestured toward it when visitors came, but she had chosen its location deliberately, at eye level, across from the coat rack, where anyone entering the house would have to see it. Lois May Martin, sole owner, filed March 22, 2003, amended October 14, 2024, no secondary liens. It was a title reclaimed in full, not from the bank, but from assumption, from the belief that her signature had always been available. She paid her bills early now, never out of fear, but from quiet control. The checkbook lived in the second drawer next to the stapler. Her passwords were handwritten in a spiral notebook she didn't label. Every month, a letter came from Mark. No return address, just a new zip code and slightly shakier handwriting. She didn't read them, didn't open them, just ran them through the shredder one by one, No ritual, no malice, just practicality. She owed him nothing, not attention, not recognition, not the comfort of her outrage. Patricia stopped by every Saturday with a paper bag of bakery leftovers and a new pair of earrings she claimed she forgot to return. That morning, she sat on the porch swing, watching Ivy and Lois edge the new herb bed. You know, she said, sipping lemonade. They'll never see it coming. Lois looked over. What? How peaceful you are. Lois smiled without looking away from the garden. Peace was always mine, she said. They just mistook it for silence. That night, Lois poured a cup of chamomile and stood barefoot at the screen door. The breeze moved softly through the yard. The porch lights glowed just enough to illuminate the stone path Ivy had helped her set down 2 summers ago. Somewhere down the block, wind chimes sang in the key of memory. Inside, Ivy sat curled in the armchair with a fleece blanket and a novel in her lap. Patricia was asleep in the guest room, one hand still resting on a crossword she never finished. Lois turned back toward the living room. She walked past the deed, past the fireplace, past the stack of letters she'd never read. She didn't linger, she didn't need to.